flow management with Kanban. In this webinar, we'll cover the following aspects: importance of the flow management, bird's eye view of the general practices, and how do you manage the flow. So before COVID, and now again situation is improving, I'm sure most of you have been stuck in a rush hour traffic while going to office or returning from office to home. It was a natural phenomena, and if you are not stuck in the rush hour traffic, the day felt like quite incomplete. So what do you think matters during the rush hour traffic? Is it how fast you travel for a shorter duration? Or do you think it is the average speed during the entire journey? Yeah, it's the latter one, right? You have to look at what is the average speed that you have in the entire journey. And the moment of truth is that the fundamental truth about flow is it is not how fast an item moves from one workflow stage. To be more predictable, to be more customer focused, you have to look at how smoothly your work moves from the start till the end. So it is the predictability that counts. And how do you achieve that predictability? When you manage your flow in a way that your flow of the work is smooth. There are no bottlenecks. There are no blockages. Your dependencies are not holding the work. The wait time on the work that is flowing from start to finish is less. Now the work can be any user story if you are in IT. Right? It can be any piece of feature that you are going to develop. It can be anything that is a dominant activity to make it complete, to meet the demands and the expectations of the customer. Having said that, let's look at the 6 general practices of Kanban. I'll just give you a bird's eye view of these 6 general practices. So manage flow is one of the 6 general practices of Kanban. You can see this is the third one. So let's look at these general practices, because the first 3 general practices usually help you to manage your flow, to make your flow much predictable, much smoother. And the last 2 practices will help you review and improve your flow. So the first practice of Kanban is visualize. So what visualize means is that you have to visualize the way you are working. Whatever is your current process of working, whatever are the workflow stages in your work, you have to visualize them. How do you visualize? Either you create swim lanes on the board, physical board, or you might use some kind of the digital software where you start putting in your workflow stages from start to end and look at from what all stages is the work moving. So once you visualize, you identify the risk. The second general practice of Kanban is limiting the work in progress. So when you create WIP limits in your system, it creates a pull system. Pull system helps you unburden the people who are involved in delivering that particular piece of work. As against a push system burdens the people. So when you limit the WIP, when you create a pull system, you only pull the work when there is a capacity available for pulling that work. And you follow the agile concepts of stop starting and start finishing. So finish the work that you have in hand first, rather than starting the new one and keep it waiting. You start looking at how will you generate value from the work that you are doing. The third general practice of Kanban is managing the flow. You look at how your work moves, as I said earlier, and you have to make it smooth and predictable. And there are various ways to look at the flow and to make it smooth. And this is the topic of this particular webinar, the flow management with Kanban. We'll look at it in more detail in the future slides. The fourth general practice of Kanban is make policies explicit. So you set explicit policies. That means you agree on certain rules that will move the work from one stage to another stage. For example, your definition of ready. When is your story or when is your feature ready to be moved to starting development queue? When will you call your development complete? When will you start testing? So these are all explicit policies. The next general practice is implementing the feedback loop. Certainly, it is the reviews in the meetings. So you can only improve once you reflect back upon how you performed. So implementing feedback loops is the fifth general practice of Kanban. And the sixth one is improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally. So you find out the improvement areas based on the data that you have collected from the work that you have done. And when you prioritize those improvement areas, you prioritize them collaboratively within your team. So these are the six general practices of Kanban in a bird's eye view. So when you implement all these six general practices of Kanban, they help you to increase the throughput and reduce the waste. And once you reduce the waste, you optimize your flow. So shift your focus from people to work. In the last slide, you must have noticed I did not mention people anywhere. It was only the work that was moving from one stage to another. It is the work that you have to make busy. Don't make people busy. Unburden the people. When you unburden the people, they will be able to focus more on creating the value for your customers. They will be more motivated. And Kanban helps you to unburden the people by limiting the WIP, by managing the flow. So make your work busy. And how do you manage the flow? There are various steps, or you can say there are various ways in which you can actually manage the flow. The first one is you visualize the work and the flow of the work. The second is you look at the WIP limit, your WIP limits to achieve how can you achieve the maximum throughput. And then you identify the bottlenecks and try to resolve them, and then you repeat so that you can continuously improve. So there is never a stage when you will see my flow is optimized. So every time you can find one or the other aspects of the flow which are not actually working or which are generating more waste. You should always look at your flow and try to optimize your flow. So let's look at what does visualize mean. How will you visualize the work and the flow of work, and how does it actually help you to manage the flow? So as we discussed a few slides back, so visualize is a general practice of Kanban, and it helps you to visualize the flow of the work. Now, what does that mean? So every business has a value chain. So that value chain, when you discover that value stream or the value stream, you will see what are the smaller steps to deliver a piece of functionality or piece of work. Means what are the steps from concept to cash. So when you generate the ideas, you convert them into deliverables, and certainly you earn your revenue or money by selling it to the customer. So what are the various work stages that you have from concept to cash? until and unless you make those work stages transparent, you cannot manage the flow. Now, what are those stages? So those stages are all the dominant activities that you have to do to complete that piece of work. People handovers, these are not dominant activities. They can be on the line. Any dominant activity that is changing the state of the work is your workflow stage. For example, in a software development life cycle, we'll say that there is ideas, then we'll do the market research, then we will do the discovery, we'll come out with a prioritized list or the prioritized backlog, and then we'll move it to development. Within development also there could be various stages. Like we'll do the coding, we might do the code review, maybe unit testing, and then we'll move it to test. Now there could be various types of testing. We'll do sanity testing, we'll do functional testing, we'll do performance testing, regression testing, or you may simply call it as testing. Then you'll have validation and verification done by your business. Then you might have validation and verification done by your users. And then you deliver it. And when you release it to production or release your product to the market, there can be various steps in releasing also. And there can be certain dominant activities within the release as well. So you'll have to, the idea is that you have to visualize each and every work stage. Only then you can find where there is a blocker, which work stage is creating waste, which work stage has more dependencies, which work stage is blocking. Is it being blocked because we have less number of specialists working in the work stages? Is it being blocked because of any external dependency? So you will be able to visualize. You will be able to see how your work is moving from one stage to another. You can look at the arrival rate and the departure rate. So what is arrival? So as soon as your work touches a particular stage in your flow, your work has arrived in that particular stage, you can mark that this is the time or this is the day on which we started the work. Now work might be waiting because of the dependency or a blocker, but your counter has started. You have to look at like when the work is now exiting that particular stage. The difference between the departure rate and the arrival rate of the work of that stage is called as the cycle time. So you look at the cycle times, you try to plot them. You might find that there are certain patterns that are coming when you plot, that are being, you can observe certain patterns of your cycle time. You might come across the pattern like 5 items are finishing with a cycle time of 8 days, whereas there are few outliers on the side which are finishing quite late, or some of the work is finishing early. So your cycle time over here is 8 days on an average. Then you have to look at it, why 8 days? Is it really taking 8 days to complete that piece of work? Or is it lesser? So when you visualize, you'll be able to look at like what are the blockers, what is the cycle time, and how much time are you spending to generate waste or to wait. So visualization helps you to visualize the flow of the work, as well as where are the blockers and what is that important thing that you need to solve. What is the priority thing that you need to solve to make your smooth flow. Let's look at the second method by which you can actually manage your flow. The second is the WIP limits. So when you limit when you create WIP limits, you create a full system, as we discussed in a few slides back. The goal of setting up the WIP limit is only to make your system predictable and smooth. How? How does it help? So when you limit the WIP, you assess your capacity. So if there is capacity to complete only 3 tickets, you will only take 3 tickets into your queue. So you will limit the WIP to 3. Everybody in your organization, all the stakeholders, even your customers would know that this team is capable of delivering only 3 tickets at a particular point in time. They will know when will the next set of tickets be processed because you have certain cycle time or service level expectations set with the business stakeholders. Now, having said that, when you set your WIP limits, they might not be set correctly. Your flow might not be smooth. There could be higher wait time in your flow. People might be busy. So you might be setting a higher WIP limit and pulling up more work than actually you can consume. So that means that you have to keep on modifying and revisiting your WIP limits. But when you revisit them, do not overhaul. Change them slowly. Be as slow as possible in the change. Use your flow review meeting to determine the changes. Now, flow review is one kind of meeting that happens either bi-weekly or monthly, wherein you collect all the data, all the tickets on which you have worked upon. You correct the data of your lead time. You find out what is the average throughput. You apply the latest law, and then you determine how is your flow review. And you identify where you generated more waste, where there is more wait time. And WIP limits help you to focus on your work. It helps you to move your tickets in a way so that there is less context switching. You start finishing, stop starting. WIP limits will help you to decrease the complexity of the work through the workflow stages, will help you decrease the batch size and increase the focus upon completing the work. So when you want to change your WIP limit, you do not look at only single factor like capacity. So what we usually do is that, okay, we have a 3-member team. We can do 3 tickets at a time. If you have 6-member team, we'll say we can do 6 tickets at a time. So capacity is not the only factor that determines the WIP limit. There are many other factors. You have to look at the complexity of the work in terms of the dependencies, in terms of the risks that are being generated. Will there be any external dependency, external blocker in the system that you will need to handle? Are you working on some new pieces of the work that have not yet been done till now? So will there be a discovery phase in that? What would be the technical challenges that you might face? What would be the other regulatory challenges like legal approval, security approval that you might have to get, and accordingly alter your delivery? So you have to look at all these factors before you actually set your WIP limits. And when you set your WIP limits, it is not that you cannot revise them, but do not revise them often. If you revise them often, your consistency of the flow will be lost. So once you set your WIP limit, set up a frequency until when you are going to monitor it. Your flow might not be smooth for that period of time, which is still fine because your system is still evolving. Your workflow is still evolving. But you'll reach a point where you will set WIP limits in a way that you will make your system smooth and predictable. You will be able to commit consistent service level expectations to your customers. Now that leads to a third topic on managing the flow, which is bottlenecks. So bottlenecks are anything that is actually blocking your flow of work. It could be a technical challenge, it could be a regulatory challenge, it could be that we don't have the capacity to do the work. It might be that people who are doing the work had a vacation plan. It could be any specialist who might have to work on a piece of particular item, but that specialist is not available because they are busy in some other priority task. So there can be a number of blockers or bottlenecks, reasons for a blocker or bottleneck. The only way you can manage a blocker or bottleneck is to make it transparent. And how would you make it transparent? When you have identified all the workflow stages and have visualized them on the board, physical board or the digital board. You will identify at which workflow stage is your work stop. Always remember that people and teams are not blockers. It is the actions that need to be taken as a blocker. So when we say that we do not have an architect who can review this piece of architecture because the architect is busy in some other priority task, and hence my work is blocked. So architect is not the blocker. The review of this technical architecture document is the block. So look at from this particular point of view that we do not have an architect reviewing it, what are the alternate options to move the work from this queue? So if you look at the blocker from the actions point of view, you will be able to resolve blockers more quickly rather than waiting on people to come and resolve the blocker. So people and teams are not the blocker. It is the action that needs to be taken as a blocker. So to remove the blocker, you have to look at collaboratively. There are various methods to understand why the blocker happened and to understand the various action plans to remove the blockers. One of the methods is blocker clustering. So in blocker clustering, we cluster the same type of blockers into a group. So we create the groups of same type of blockers and then identify which are the internal blockers and which are the external blockers. And we try to find a solution to those group of blockers. So we follow the Pareto's rule also over here, that 80%, 80-20 rule, 80% of the problems can be solved by finding solutions to 20% of the problems. So we apply these kind of rules in solving the blockers, and then we shift our focus from people optimization to flow optimization. And then we repeat. So you will again visualize your flow. You will again look at or review your WIP limit and again identify like what are the other blockers that you might have. So evolve slowly because change is painful. Make your changes so slowly that people can adapt to those changes. Now let's look at what are the various metrics that will help you to identify where your flow is blocked. So CFD is one of the metrics. So CFD stands for cumulative flow diagram. So the various bands in the CFD are the various stages of the work. The last band would be the stage at which your work is done. It is exiting the workflow. The first band would be the stage at which your work is entering the workflow. And the other bands in between would be the in progress stages. For example, in this graph, backlog is one of the stages, which is the entry stage. And then you have various other stages in between, which is approved, buffer, final review, progress, and then you have a exit stage, which is the done stage. So you can look at this CFD diagram, the patterns in which the bands are being formed. So if you find narrowing bands, so if you see that the flow is good, but suddenly your band of any of the color has narrowed down, that means that there is more capacity of the work, more capacity, but you are doing less work. That means that you will have to look at your WIP limit for that particular stage. So if you see a narrowing band, your capacity is going waste. You can do more than you can think, than you are doing right now. If you see a widening band in between, that means the entry rate is higher. That means you are consuming more than you can deliver. So there will be a higher wait time in that particular stage. If your to-do is higher than done, so if this band at which the entry is being done, which is to-do or the backlog, if it is wider than what you have done, that means that your demand is getting generated faster and you are not doing the work faster. In that case, you have to look at how can you shape the demand. You have to look at the demand patterns. You have to look at how is your demand coming into your system? Is it a burst demand, or is it coming in batches? Is it coming in bulk, or is it regular? So when you identify your demand, you will identify what are the work item types that you are doing, what is the type of work, and then you try to classify them into the classes of service, and then accordingly act, so that you can have a smooth flow, a smooth band in the CFD. So cumulative flow diagram is one of the metrics in Kanban that helps you assess whether your flow is smooth or do you need to you have to do something about it. Another matrix in Kanban is the flow efficiency matrix. So it is derived through this particular formula, which is work divided by the lead time. So lead time is the entire cycle time that your work is taking from moving from one stage to another stage or from start to finish. So you'll find the work is the touch time. So what is that touch time? What is that time on which what is the sum of time that you worked on a particular item is the work time. Work plus wait is the total time that you took to move the item from the start till the finish. So you'll identify what is the time in the total time that you took, what is the time in which you actually worked on that particular item, and that brings your flow efficiency. The higher your flow efficiency, the less waste you are generating in the system. So I'm not saying that you can achieve a 100% flow efficiency. It is practically impossible, because there will be certainly a wait in time in the system. But try to achieve as higher flow efficiency as you can, not at the cost of the people, but at the cost of moving the work in your system. So these are the two metrics that actually help you look at the patterns of the work, patterns of the flow, and accordingly you can optimize your flow of the work by removing blockers, by altering the WIP limit, by looking at did you miss any of the workflow stages while you are visualizing your work.